No, we're live now.
Right on.
We're live. Danny, happy birthday for starters. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. Live from isolation.
Live from isolation. So, for those of you who aren't aware, Dad had a coronavirus case at his work, so now he's been tested and is isolating for a few days at home. Plus, it's his birthday, so happy birthday, Danny. It's super cool. We're going to have a chat today about martial arts. So let's have a quick start at the beginning, because I do love the origin story, and it sets the theme for everyone. How old were you when you started martial arts?
6 years old.
6 years old. And what was the first martial art that you ever trained in?
Well, technically it was judo, but really it was only trained a couple of months. And I've said this before, but due to lack of popularity in the 80s of judo, probably certainly wouldn't happen now. Grappling's all the rage, but back then it was hard in a provincial town to get things going. So anyway, judo, short period of time, and then straight after that it shut down, and I started with Shotokan karate, as you know.
Yeah, so then Shotokan karate, and that ended up taking you to Japan for a while, because your parents ran worked at a caravan yard, correct? And the owners of that caravan yard sent you over to Japan to train for 12 months. What was that experience like?
Yeah, they actually work for a big Japanese-owned resort that's out the back of Yopon. But yeah, partially right. They are Japanese-run, and in those days they had a bit of a. I wasn't the first one. A couple of young fellas went before me. Children of trusted employees or employees they valued their time. The folks that own that resort would send these kids over to Japan as a thank you, if you like. So I was lucky enough to get that opportunity through my parents' hard work, really.
And there were some strains of Shotokan that were super tough back in the day. That's what people don't realize, is that Shotokan was actually like a bare knuckle, full contact form of martial arts through some strains until it got watered down, much like, as far as I'm concerned, has happened to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the moment. Can you talk us a little bit through your experiences with Shotokan karate?
Sure. And I mean, I'll digress. You're 100% correct. There's a lot of parallels. I talk about this with Paul Cale quite a bit. There's a lot of parallels between what a few of us rogues think's happening with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and what happened with karate over the sort of the period of the last 40 years or so. So well put. But anyway, nonetheless, Shotokan, yeah, obviously like a lot of karate, even Kyokushin's going through the same thing. It's splintered, and then it splinters again, and before you know it, there's just all these different arms of that base style. So Shotokan, I was with the JKA, which is an acronym for the Japan Karate Association. They're the biggest karate organisation in the world, and they're still very big. And I don't follow the sports karate scene now, but certainly right up until the late 80s, it was extremely tough. And even into the 90s when I was in Japan, it was quite hard. And to be honest, what happened behind closed doors, what we call dojo sparring, or what happened in the gym was full on. So even though what was represented in tournaments might be classed as non-contact, what happened behind closed doors, especially, I was blessed and honoured enough to train at Japan's top karate university when I lived there, and that was full on, man. There was nothing, no contact. It was not an easy ride, that's for sure.
And it's a very direct style too, right? Like what looks like a lot of bouncing around is because when that contact hits, it's very direct and violent at that point in time. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yeah, Ichigeki Hisatsu is what they call it in Japanese, but it's that whole same with kendo, and it's the ippon of judo. It's the whole idea of the one hit, one kill. Sounds dramatic, I know, but it's about that one shot. So very, very explosive across the off the mark, very linear, strong basic techniques. So the whole ideology or the ideal behind Shotokan is that you muster everything, you bring all your force to bear into that one technique.
Yeah,
So
and
interesting concept.
Yeah, and it does. It trains a particular area of combat. So then, from Shotokan karate, what was next? Because you entered into Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and NHB. We're going to call it NHB because that's what it kind of was called at the time, fairly early on. About what year was that, and where were you living at the time when you had your first experiences with mixed martial arts in Australia?
I come from most little interviews I do, I broach this subject because I think it's an important backstory. I come from a family of martial artists. Well, I think so. They might not consider themselves martial artists. My father was a strong wrestler, and my uncle was a very good competitive amateur boxer, and grandfather was very strong, and I even had a great uncle somewhere along the line that was catch-can wrestler. So I always had a strong affinity for grappling and always wanted to grapple. Often, hence the judo first up. But anyway, nonetheless, like a lot of people in my generation, I saw the UFCs. I actually first time I ever saw Royce Gracie was in a Japanese martial arts magazine in '93, Kakutogi magazine, so MMA type mag. In '93, while I was there training karate, as you know, and I trained with 3 Brazilians at the time, and they didn't have good things to say about the Gracies in terms of their character and whatever, but that's a story for another time. So anyway, joined the army when I got back from Japan, and VHS, the usual story. VHS UFCs 1, 2, and 3 I brought while I was on posting to Butterworth in Malaysia, and come back, and there was really not much Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu around, so I started judo again in Sydney while I was posted in Sydney, and then when I moved back to Queensland, I connected with Chris Hazeman, and so really my formative years, I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so the NHB grappling, catch wrestling type thing was 97, and then BJJ was 2001. Yeah.
And you met Greg Jackson, correct? And then you spent some time in the States with him. Where did you meet Greg Jackson? How long did you stay with him, and how much of an effect did that have on you personally?
So I met Greg, as you know, I was working for Steve-O, and trying to make it as a fighter. And in those days, if you were any good, it was really difficult in Australia once you had a couple of wins to get fights. I was having amateur boxing fights and doing no-gi submission grappling comps and doing whatever I could to stay busy because I just couldn't get a fight. Anyway, they brought out Joey Villasenor out, one of Greg's leading charges at the time, and long story short, I got flogged and in a fight. But I met Greg afterwards, and he, whether he truly meant it or not, I don't know. But he had good things to say about me and about my future and all that sort of thing. So me going to America was a collaboration between Steve Irwin and Greg Jackson. I stayed and not lived. I was only ever there for a month at a time, but I went there half a dozen times over 2 or 3 years. And Greg Jackson's influence, I've sort of lost contact over the years, but his influence is profound. he's one of the smartest human beings I've ever met. And he had formative training in structure and stand-up from Mike Winklejohn, but his grappling was self-taught fundamentally out of books.
Yeah.
So a very bright individual, and really resonated strongly with me because I've got instructors, like we all do, and I've got influences, but I really, fair to say, over 20 years of grappling and even the karate stuff, about 90% of it's been on my own.
Yeah, well, I completely sympathise with that, because I would argue that mine has been fairly self-taught as well, while I've travelled and absorbed as much as I can. Unfortunately, Townsville hasn't had a huge amount of great grappling coaches that were willing to put in the time and effort required to reach that next level. Whereas I was kind of obsessed. Like the first place I trained, we did a little bit of full contact karate one day, and then no gi or gi the next day, and it was one of each one day. And I'm kind of like, like now we train everything every day, possibly multiple times. And when I was fighting, I would do Thai pads, boxing pads, conditioning classes, and grapple every day. I would do 4 or 5 sessions. Now, not all of them admittedly were hour-long sessions, because I might just book someone to hold pads for half an hour, but it was a significant amount of volume to get those skills up. And I think that's generally fairly accepted now. Now, all the guys that I know that train with you reckon that you train more than all the high-level athletes that you train put together, which is amazing. Which is obviously because you started at 6 years old, you've been able to maintain what is a fairly high level of volume for training, which is fantastic. Now, you've gone from a childhood of martial arts to then fighting mixed martial arts at a high level, exposure to guys like Greg Jackson and his team, and then you led a team as a coach for a bunch of years in one of the biggest gyms in Brisbane, and now you've transitioned again to running a small what would you call it, boutique training environment for people that want to train. Now, you probably wouldn't call it boutique, but that's what we're going to call it, because it's small group but high level training. Last time I was in the garage, there was 3 or 4 black belts and a couple of brown belts rolling in like a 6x4 meter space, extremely technically, and and then we put on the gloves and shin guards and do Valley Tudo type sparring at the end. I love it. How has that been as a person for you every time you have to go through that change? Because I know for me, none of those changes were ever easy, but everyone's going to go through it at some point in time. If they're going to do martial arts over a long period of time, they're going to go through those evolutions of, new, maybe recreational, then a competitive set, then another recreational set, then maybe coaching or a professional setting. And all of those things require us to kind of like change the way we do things or how we perceive ourselves a little bit. How'd you handle that?
Yeah, difficult to answer on a public forum, but great question. Certainly, the last transition between and that experience of teaching those crew of killers wasn't a short period of time. That was 13 years of my life. And if I could change in the manner in which I left and the changes that I made, I would do so. I regret the way it all sort of went down, but nonetheless, I still think it would have happened. for a lot of different reasons, family reasons, and I just had a strong, hard look at myself, and I'm just I think it is a bit cliche. Some people, I think it is a form of art. What we do, given a long enough period of time, it sort of transcends the whole sport thing. And like any form of art, I think if you do it long enough, you earn the right to interpret it and approach it in the manner that which best suits you. It was extremely difficult. It continues to be difficult, but I don't regret it. I like it. It suits it's fit for purpose. It suits my personality. I only want to train people who really want to train with me. And when you force yourself into a corner and under a rock like I have, one of the few benefits of a considerable downsize and going into the shadows is you really can choose. You have that freedom to be very pure, at least how I feel, very pure about my approach to it. I work with people who want to work with me. It's not elitist by any chance. I've got white belts in here and average Joes, but they've got to want to be here. And I didn't want to be in a position to be like a business type of a thing for me, where I felt like I had to have a certain product to keep students, and that just wasn't for me in the end, mate.
It definitely, I just know that it's something that we all go through.
My cat.
Especially it's a beautiful cat. Especially as martial artists, athletes, and humans, we don't adapt to change that well. And I think as martial artists, we should see that as part of the process as well. Like you blow an ACL, adapt to change. You can't sit there and have an emotional reaction to it for too long, especially if you're going to talk martial arts and Budo and all these other things as well. It means you've got to take 3 deep breaths and figure out how you're going to continue to fight the war from here on in. And, life circumstances and everything will have you questioning that as well. Like I had kids the whole time, and then some people have kids and give up fighting. I had kids and trained more because I felt like I had more of a reason to set a good example for them and whatnot. So it's definitely tough times for everyone when they go through that. And I think having old guys like yourself being able to, or older, being able to mentor people, is really important, because I really respect it even more now, knowing that we have guys in my center now that are 20 years old, 30 years old. I'm 40 next year. Most of my favorite coaches are in their late 40s to early 50s and still training a heap. So it's really important that I have those mentors like yourself to reach out with, to ask questions and whatnot. Because
I just think if it has to be sustainable. So my journey won't be yours, and yours won't be the next person's, and you do a really, really good job of keeping it real, for want of a better term, and still having a commercially viable business. I couldn't, but my point is that if you want to do this for the rest of your life, you've got to be. It's not just about kicking and punching, arm bars and strangles. You've got to be putting yourself in a position over a sustained period of time where you're happy. You're happy with the culture that you're immersed in. You're happy, if you're the instructor, with the culture that you're creating. And you're around like-minded people. Now, if that means you're happy to be in a big gym with hundreds of students, cool. But it might be my situation where you only got half a dozen. But I don't think it's sustainable to be in a position that you're not happy, that you're not happy with. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Now, what some people might not know is actually you were a prison guard for many years as well on the floor, and you've only just moved into into a training role, obviously without breaking any rules, you've had to deal with absolute real violence many times over. And I would really love to hear your perspective on what martial arts you found were beneficial in, and what you think people interested in self-defense should be training and how they should be training it.
Oh, excellent. You read my mind. That's my thing now, and it'll probably be my thing leading into the next 10, 20 years, I think, is really, you and I have talked about this before, MMA is as close, pretty close. It's certainly a lot closer than what modern jiu-jitsu is to a fight, but it's still not quite on the mark. For me, like, I've sort of transcended that sports. I'll coach the odd young bloke still for professional fights, but for me, it's really about cutting to the core truth of things about real combat and how to deal with real violence. Now, in terms of what you should be doing, you got to remember that mine's in a law enforcement capacity. So why you train in terms of self-defense is a little bit outcome driven. So I am biased to the grappling arts because if you're in the police service or prison service, you can't be kicking and punching people. And, you've got to find some way to control a human who's biting, scratching, kicking and punching and trying to stab you. And you're just trying to contain them. You're not trying to have a street fight with them. So it's a little different, if that makes sense, first of all. But I can only speak personally that it's probably been said 100 times before, but really basic, whatever arts you're going to do, real fighting, when the violence is there and the threat of the unknown, when that heart rate goes up high, and it will because you're frightened and you're nervous, you'll only do real white belt stuff. You'll only do very basic meat and potatoes movements, gross motor movements. That's why grappling's such a good fit. And I found for average Joes, it's far more, because it's a primal instinct. If you're untrained, once you get hurt or you get frightened, if you can't keep the space and keep that reactionary gap, you will tend to clinch and grapple without any training. So for me, the grappling arts focus on or harness that primal instinct that we've all got as humans to actually naturally stand in the pocket in that danger zone and trade punches. That takes considerable retraining for the most part, if that makes sense. You've got to be a fairly credible boxer or kickboxer, and that's some people can't do that. They can hit the bag for years and just still not have that in them, whereas grappling is definitely appeals to the masses, in my opinion. So, but the whole self-defense versus sports jiu-jitsu thing, that's overdone too. As an old, you and I have talked about this before, as an old knuckle dragon MMA guy, I think that's a little bit overdone. I think if you stick to solid fundamentals that work, gi, no gi, or with strikes, you got a couple of decent takedowns and you don't curl up in a ball when someone throws a punch at you, and you're in physical shape, and then you'll be able to handle yourself. So good, solid boxing, kickboxing, with a heavy takedown emphasis in your grappling game, and being in shape, having a holistic approach to your training, and this whole keeping it playful thing and only rolling at 20% or whatever, that's nonsense. If you want to get ready if you want to be able to handle yourself in a real bad situation, you've got to replicate it in the gym. There's no two ways about that. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Yeah, you got to get after it every now and then. That's why, we do it once a month or so. Like, I'll just select people out. There's no if or buts, and then we put that person through the grinder for 5 5s. Last time we did it was for 21 minute rounds. I don't particularly love the long hour long or 2 hour long rolling sessions, because I think like it just doesn't have anything to do with actual fighting, because real fighting is going to be much shorter, and that's probably where MMA isn't a fit. MMA is a great problem solving to all but real violence doesn't go for 3 5-minute rounds or even one 15-minute round. It's going to be much faster, So,
yeah, for sure. And the big thing about whether you can handle yourself in real violence, whether you're unlucky enough to have to defend yourself, or you're in a place of employment where you're statistically more likely to have to deal with violence. It's about understanding the physiological responses that go on in your body when you have true fear and dealing with them. That's as important, if not more important, than what technical skill set that you have or haven't got.
Yeah, and I truly believe if you're not striking and grappling live every week, you won't be ready when the time comes. So that's why there's no training program or short course or a government mandated course that is going to replace you. One live rolling session, one live sparring session, and some kind of instruction. So you're probably going to have to train bare minimum twice a week, but 3 times would be better. 6 times even better than that if you're serious about your actual self-defense. So when you've had to deal with these kind of things that have happened, obviously you've always been training, so you've kind of felt ready. What could you name like some of the techniques that you've used over and over? Because we've talked about it before and I kind of know the answer, but I would really love to share it with everyone else.
Cool. Clinch is king. Clinch is king in a real fight, and it's sort of the area that's still there's a big disparity in sports jiu-jitsu and real fighting, is in not even in the takedowns, like high crutches and double legs and those sort of leg dive techniques from the distance. You get a lot of sports guys that are quite good at that now, but seeing guys being very good in that Greco-Roman sort of area in the clinch, because if it's a real situation, you'll fight as long as you need to in that position till you get on top of someone on the ground, if that makes sense. So I found, that one of the big differences, mate, between prize fighting and I'm sort of geeking out here a little bit, bear with me, prize fighting and real fighting is there's a couple of things. Firstly, there's obviously stress in a prize fight, but you and I are going to fight each other. You're 10 feet away. I'm 10 feet away. There's a referee there. We both exactly know what each other's intentions are. And if we're any good, there'll be tape on each other. So we know what our skill sets are. So yeah, it's stressful and it's nervous, and you're trying to take my head off. I'm trying to take yours off, but it's a fairly controlled environment. But when it's real, and particularly when you're dealing with psychopaths and murderers, there's that unknown of if you slip up and they land one on you and they turn your lights out, they're not going to stop until you're dead. So grappling really comes into its own. You play the odds there a little bit. That this whole standing and trading, even if it was allowed from a law enforcement point of view, which it clearly isn't, you're tempting. At least for me, there's that unknown there. There's that posturing phase, like when they're squaring up to and yelling and screaming. You don't know whether they're fair income or not, if that makes sense. I call it the posturing phase, where they're posturing. So you don't know what their intent is, whether they want to hurt you, just yell at you, kill you. You don't know. So for me, all those answers questions are answered, and those dramas are fixed with grappling. So I found, clinching up straight away, and getting that top position and just no space. Really, it's just 3-strike white belt jiu-jitsu on the ground. Heavy position on top. And obviously, from a law enforcement point of view, if it was real, I'd be advocating no two ways about it, strangulation. Okay, once you cut blood and oxygen off, it's the great leveler. Joint mobility, Paul Cale will tell you the same thing. Joint locks, which is basically pain compliance type stuff. If they're fighting for their life, you can tear every ligament and break every bone. They'll just keep fighting and fighting and fighting. But in a real fight out there, if you, I often say that strangulation is your best technique that you're ever going to have, because it doesn't discriminate. However, from my personal experiences in the prison system, obviously that's off the table. But just that clinch game, getting someone on the ground, as soon as someone's not on their feet anymore, they don't have that capacity to generate force and do serious damage. So that's been my experience the countless times that I've had to do it.
Yeah. So it's real important. And, I try not to get too caught up in it myself. Like we train people for Vale Tudo. And when anybody tells me, like, oh, I want to do this for self-defense, I'm like, well, the best thing for you to self-defense is actually training. I would suggest a mixture of grappling and striking every week. And then, from there, I can help you problem solve. But if you're not willing to commit to that regular training, I'm not really interested in training you once a week, one-on-one for self-defense. Because if you're too scared to deal with classes, just ignore what you're worried about when it comes to self-defense. Because unless you can run away or diffuse the situation, you've already lost. Like, you've already lost in your mind before you've even started training. So I try and stay away from those nuffies and just be like, you need to come in and train. And, like striking and grappling, a mixture of that cross-training will give you the problem-solving required, because you've got the next 10 years before maybe one of those things might happen, and you'll be very good in 12 months. But, there's no rush, realistically.
No, never a hurry. To answer your question there before, too, at the very least, like the odd time, for me, if you're getting to that, purple, brown, black belt level, you've trained 6 or 7 years, and you are at least not comfortably defensively with punches, and your jiu-jitsu is not going to work in a self-defense situation. Not at all. But at the very least, the ideal thing is that you have a holistic approach to martial arts, and you have that all-round fighting idea where you kick, punch, and you strive for no weaknesses. You can grapple effectively. You transition between everything, like our MMA template, correct? However, at the bare minimum, I would always say grappling, but you have to be okay with the punches. You have to put the gloves on. You have to spar. You have to do a bit of kickboxing. Otherwise, me personally, I don't think it's valid unless you're willing to go down that track.
And it's much easier now with more skilled people to train with to do that safely as well. So, when I first started, I probably wasn't the nicest sparring partner in the world, but with our updated training systems, we definitely are better at getting after it. Like, you don't need a bunch of high-level guys that you trust in a room. Like, there's enough people that can grapple well enough and box and kickbox well enough that it can be done safely. What would be your advice to people that want to weaponize their jiu-jitsu or have better jiu-jitsu, of how they roll with punches safely, and how they can do it if they're frightened of doing it?
Well, it's like any concept of learning, right? Whenever you're learning a new skill or introducing a new skill, if you try to run before you walk or walk before you crawl, you're going to fall over, and it's going to be traumatic. So introducing, particularly striking, I do think aliveness is important, and the more you skirt around the issue of sparring, and you approach your striking training from the standpoint of hitting the bag, skipping, and punching pads, all of those things are important. But the slow, incremental introduction to striking is important. So that means, obviously finding a facility or a structure like yours where the culture is good, and you get brought along slowly with the sparring, so it's not traumatic. But the sparring should be, I think you should be able to spar every day. And if you can't spar every day, then there's too much head contact. So like that Cuban amateur boxing methodology where they do rounds and rounds of sparring every day, but it's in a sort of a touch sparring plenty of speed and all that sort of thing, but just no power, no head trauma. I think that's important.
And it takes practice. I think people have got to do it early, right? Because it takes practice to take the emotion out of it, and also the sensitivity of your face. Because someone touches a beginner's face and they freak out and get mad, and it's like you only just got touched with a set of 16-ounce gloves, and you're freaking out.
The concept is easy enough. It's not rocket science. You just don't spar hard. But that's difficult if you're in an environment or a culture where it is a relationship. So it depends on the other person and to a broader degree, the instructor who's policing that room. So if the instructor doesn't want that culture and he wants hard sparring and he wants guys winning rounds and smashing people, then that environment for a person who's a bit timid and who actually needs it, that environment won't be for them. They'll have to go somewhere else. And
it held me back.
I know about that environment more than most. And if I could do my time again, I would have done it differently for sure. Because it precludes the people who need martial arts the most. I don't want to sound cliche or corny, but alpha males, if you're an instructor, alpha males are easy to teach. Any bullfed can teach an alpha male how to fight. It's getting a high level instructor will create a culture and a syllabus and a methodology that everyone gets tough, and everyone gets across the line, not just your XA grade football players. That's how
I feel that too. I actually think that taking someone from weak to strong is the best thing and the most satisfying. Like we've all had talented guys or kids that come in. Knuckling all your efforts on them doesn't show that you're an amazing coach. But I do think that the hard sparring that I did held me back. Trying to win rounds rather than trying to win skills held me back for, it probably killed my progress. I probably could have been much better in the competitive time that I had, because you've only got a window from, say, 15 to 30 before maybe your body breaks down, because athletes' bodies generally break down between 30 and 40. So, we're starting to see younger and younger champions in the UFC and kickboxing because, like by 30, your ACLs and ligaments and things, if you're unlucky, will go. People that are able to compete beyond that are anomalies. They're not the rules. You've only got to look at any professional sport to realize that.
And to the point about, what tempo of your sparring or what type of sparring you do to actually develop technically, that if you're sparring, and this is even jiu-jitsu, it's not so much, because you can spar pretty hard jiu-jitsu, in my opinion, and still have a cerebral mindset. And I think a cerebral mindset, at least for me personally and the people I've taught, if you want to develop technically in and amongst all that chaos of live sparring, your brain you have to be in a cerebral mindset, because if it's notched up or dialed up too high that it becomes fight or flight and it's war, then I'm sure there's some people out there that can still operate like that, but for the most part, if it's too full on and it's fun, I get it, the adrenaline and the kick punch and the worried about getting hit and whatever else, you're not at that cerebral level that you can assimilate new techniques or movement patterns, or that's been my experience, especially as I've gotten older, that it has to be it kickboxing or grappling or whatever, it has to be alive. It has to be an element of timing involved, but it has to be a cerebral experience. Otherwise, sure, now and then you can dial it up so you get, getting used to that fear, but for 90% of it, I think it should be at a level that you can think about your technique.
Absolutely. Now, here's a good debate, because I like this one, and you like to gi versus no gi. What should we be doing, and why? Let's play into it and have some fun with it for a bit.
Yeah, cool. I can't believe that conversation still comes up. It's 2020, but no. In all honesty, people do what you enjoy. I think is important. But firstly, if you stay, if you're a hobbyist, all right, or you're just trying to be well-rounded, I think you should do both. And if you stick to basic fundamental movements, your game shouldn't fall apart, whether you take it on, take the gi off or put it on. You add strikes, it shouldn't make a difference. If it does, there's something wrong with your jiu-jitsu. That's my first point. Now, secondly, it just depends. Again, what's your, you got to be a little bit outcome driven. After a few years, if you're a really top of the food chain professional MMA fighter, or now these guys that are getting paid decent money to do no-gi submission wrestling or submission grappling, do they need to wear a gi? Probably not, mate, no. But like for self-defense and learning how to fight, you absolutely do, because I said this on Damo's last podcast. Yeah, no one fights you in a gi in a self-defense situation, but they don't generally, maybe in Townsville, but they don't generally fight you in their Speedos either.
Yeah.
Right. So using the clothing and not, if you've had the fear of God put in you and you're trying to survive and you've got an ability to strangle someone with a t-shirt, you probably will if you've got that skill set. So I think both are important. And it just depends how far down the rabbit hole you want to go with one or the other. If the AFB, IB, whatever they are, and you just want to be a gi grappler only, it wouldn't make that much sense not to wear the gi, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. And look, it depends how much of an expert you want to be too, though, right? This is the way I see it. After I started training the gi, I really loved it. I loved it because I knew I was going to fight Kudo in the gi. I loved the violent rules of Kudo. I found some really effective gi techniques. When I started training in the gi, the thing that I didn't realize that would happen is my no gi got better.
Yeah, for sure.
It just did. There was things that I could do in the gi that I was like, ooh, that's a really good move. And then I adapted it to my no gi. So releasing myself from that dogma actually helped me get better at both. And if you're out training for self-defense and you're not doing both and you're not doing 50-50, I just think you're selling yourself short, and you can get great at both. Rafael Lovato Jr. is a good example of that. And there's a bunch of other people as well.
And look, I suppose gun to my head, I still probably, I talked about it just before, I probably reached that cerebral, the state of flow a little better no-gi if I had to choose one or the other, because I did so many formative years without the gi on. But I enjoy both equally. I can't speak for everyone, but a lot of guys who are vehemently against one or the other, if they were to critically self-analyze, I think you find it's an ego thing. That they just struggle in one more than the other, and it's not because there's actually a real reason not to like it.
I would say most of them haven't even done 12 months in one or the other.
No, that's right. But end of the day, I think like when my own personal journey was, I was about as staunch a no-gi guy as you could get, right up until, so I got my brown belt was 7 years, something like that, as just a brown belt. And that's because I can't expect to get a black belt. I didn't wear the gi. I didn't go down that path. I was tied up with Greg Jackson at the time, and it was all MMA, wrestling, no gi grappling, all that sort of stuff. So, but I've got reasonable technique. And when I decided to embrace the gi and really understand jiu-jitsu for what I perceived it to be, I started wearing the gi again a year before I got my black belt, so 2015. And I genuinely didn't find that many roadblocks to it because I think I had decent basics. All the things I thought would be a drama just weren't. I didn't, and I hadn't worn a gi in nearly 10 years.
Yeah.
So everyone's story is different, I guess. But I think to be a well-rounded martial artist, and especially long-term, most people, if they do it over a long period of time, will eventually probably want to teach it or pass it on. And if you're not comfortable in a gi and you don't know the basics, that can hold you back a bit as an instructor. You know, you're in a position where, like you are, you're running a school and you've got functional gi game. You know your grips and you know your gi game. But if you were, you know, not addressing it and trying to teach jiu-jitsu in a gi and you had absolutely no idea how to teach it, that would be a roadblock for you. Then you'd have to start outsourcing it, employing other people to teach jiu-jitsu and whatever. So I'm glad it was definitely the right decision to embrace a gi. I don't regret it at all. And I still see what the argument is. It's like, considering what's going on in the world, who cares, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny that the gi versus no gi isn't the only argument that ever comes up. People still wonder if MMA is effective for self-defense, you know, like, yeah. And they will use like one little thing of it and go, oh, there was an MMA fighter somewhere that got knocked out, you know, like when he was out on the turf, so MMA must be no good. And it's like, people still don't understand what it's for. Or the thing that I used to get a lot is people used to say, oh, you're a fighter, you're not a martial artist. And I was like, excuse me? Excuse me? Because I test my martial arts. I'm not a martial artist. You don't even know me. What are you talking about? The only reason I got into MMA was because I wanted to test.
I copped that a little bit when I moved away from traditional karate. Again, it's born out of fear. People that, like yourself, have had the courage to – it's the ultimate proving ground, let's face it. But a lot of traditional martial arts, and I love traditional martial arts, especially as I get older. I think it's what's missing a little bit from MMA. But the other side of the fence shits me as well, mate. They take that moral high ground of, it's only, you know, it's not really fighting because, you know, it's a damn sight more fighting than doing katas in the backyard. I'll give you the hot tip. And this whole, getting back to your gi, no gi thing, the issue isn't gi, no gi. If you're a grappling specialist, and what we've already talked about it, and you can't deal in and around strikes and punches, that's the issue, not whether you wear a gi or not wear a gi.
Yeah, and that's when it actually becomes more sport than art. Yeah. And I always go back to martial art. To me, is like the study of war, person on person. You know, like that's what I always go back to, which is why I love MMA the most. It's why I love Thai boxing, because I believe that like that teaches you to blend those skills better. It's why I love boxing. We've all got two hands. They're always going to be used to set everything up. It's why I love wrestling. You know, like I feel like wrestling is the best, some kind of quasi wrestling that you can change into gi and no gi, that wrestle jitsu kind of stuff, or the real basic judo, which is just like body locks and trips and leg grabs. You know, like I love that stuff. I love all the traditional arts because I feel like they make up what's important. All the people that I really love of coaches are the ones that have cross-trained a lot, like yourself and Paul Cale and a bunch of my coaches that cross-train. They're my favorite because you can answer so many bloody questions for me, you know.
Well, even just from at least my eye, that's why I've been getting involved, and I really like the concept of Kudo, and I've got involved with the Jissen Budo affiliation, and the concept resonates very strongly with me about that whole, they call it all-round fighting or total fighting, but that to me is what all martial artists should aspire to, is and I have a mental block with anything that's not that. It'd be no different than just being a pure boxer who doesn't know how to sprawl or doesn't know how to do a rear naked choke. That's not combat.
Yeah, well, that's a great group too, because I've trained alongside some amazing Kyokushin guys in that group, some amazing judo guys,
yeah.
And just a lot of people of very different backgrounds. So that was fun for me. I spent at least 2 or 3 years traveling back and forwards from Townsville to Japan and around the place with Paul, Kudo as well. very difficult to get a fresh combat sport up and running, but definitely that rule set is probably closer to the ultimate truth than what full contact Kyokushin is. And that's no offense to Kyokushin guys, but just without the head punching, it's not going to be anywhere near the ultimate truth. But Kudo, don't let those face masks fool you. You still get knocked out. It's a really good rule set because it deals with ultimate violence into grappling, then with limited ground time, which is probably what's gonna happen.
My experiences in real fights is it's obviously not wearing a mask and all the rest of it, but that aggressive, fast, violent transition, kick, punching, headbutting, and throwing is far more of a representation of getting an individual's soul and body ready for real fighting than slap hands, fist bump, 10 minutes of flow rolling.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. I've said it for many years that a solid stand-up grappling with a blue belt in jiu-jitsu probably is more of a handful in a real fight than a black belt that can't throw a punch or can't wrestle.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be a far greater emphasis on the transition between standing and the ground, and arts like Kudo and that's fills the gaps.
It will, and look, it's one of the reasons that I'm trying my hardest to move towards a bigger space too, so we can have 30, 40 people on the mat and throw each other all the time and do more takedowns. And it took a while to take wrestling classes on Friday to 5 to 10 people to 20 to 30 people. So we generally try and focus just takedowns on and stand-up wrestling, no gi a whole night, and we definitely have another gi night where we make sure that we do some takedowns every night. So it's super good, and we definitely use a whole bunch of the stuff that you've taught us. I've actually got a very similar takedown game as you, just not as good. But I'll do my best interpretation of it.
No, that holistic approach, that universal jiu-jitsu thing that for us, Harvey talks about, they're two equal size wheels of a push bike, man. It's sure standing wrestling is a little bit more problematic to approach if you've got injuries than Newaza. I get that. But they should be equal bites of the pie, should be equal size pieces of the pie, in my opinion.
And it's interesting people pushing specialization too, because there's a lot of good grapplers that don't, and there's also a lot of great fighters in MMA that haven't specialized the whole time. They've reached the pinnacle of their sport. And then if you look, there's a very high percentage of really famous Australian kickboxers or boxers that actually have 5 to 10 years worth of professional experience fighting in other things as well. Like John Wayne Parr is fought in Australian boxing for a couple of years, got an Australian boxing championship. Then there was the Briggs brothers. They both boxed and made world championships for both. So it's interesting. There is a lot of people that have cross-trained. What do you think the benefits of delving deeper into those arts are, and who are some of your favorite Australian striking coaches?
The more I've always been a grapple-based fighter, but the more I focused on stand-up, especially towards the twilight of my career, the better my ground game was in my professional fights, because you're just not in a hurry, and you're not sort of worried about referee stand-ups and all the rest of it. So I often say, even if you're a grappling-based guy, get comfortable on your feet. In terms of coaches, I don't get it. It's been a while, and I don't know a lot of the current ones, but I've got to tell you that, and shout out to him if he's watching, because I think he's criminally underrated, is Ian Bronson.
Yeah, I like that guy. He's a really nice guy too. So we fight on his shows every now and then. He is a great guy, and he actually sent me my first MMA fight, which promoters don't do.
Yeah, he's got a very cerebral and a technical approach to the game. So I did some work with Ian, and he was outstanding. I rate him a lot. And, of course, I've done a lot with him over the years. He's one of my black belts, but he also trains my young fighters, and that's Steve Compton. He's, he's the one-stop shop too, man. Not only is he a world-class striking coach, but he's a solid jiu-jitsu player too. So, and all his weapon stuff, like, I pale in significance really when you talk about a large gamut or a broad range of martial arts skills. He really has lived and breathed it. So, but I know there's a lot of other fantastic guys out there, but I can't. I'm sort of not. Haven't really put myself out there with striking coaches. Over the years,
you've definitely got a very good set of hands and feet as well, and understand those different ranges, which is, again, like Shotokan karate might have been one of those things that people are like, but it's actually really, really good, and there are some fighters out there now that do have some very eclectic styles, like that, like Wonder Boy, and there's others as well, Michael Venom Page, and
that to get on a technical nerd out, on a geek out on the technical stuff, like Machida was a riddle no one could solve when he first got in the game. I don't know what he went before they worked out that kicking him in the body and kicking him in the legs, Shogun Hua did, but I think he was 18-0, something like that. And a lot of it was, he could grapple a bit, but the range in which you fight at especially Shotokan karate, it's another double the distance. So if you're very good and your timing's good, it's very problematic for grapplers to deal with those strikers, mainly because of the range, but also the 4-ounce gloves. That high and tight guard in boxing can be problematic when they're wearing little gloves. Yep. And those tournament karate guys like Wonder Boy and Machida, they're so indoctrinated because of point fighting and not having their heads touched. So they can be quite, they can, their chin sticks up in the air and they can get caught, and like we've all got weaknesses, but initially when they come along, very problematic to even land a glove on those guys.
Yep.
And they just slide in and out effortlessly. And with those 4-ounce gloves, that point fighting or no gloves, self-defense, you don't have to load up. You've only got to hit someone on the chin with a little 4-ounce glove on. There doesn't have to be a lot of power behind it.
No, there doesn't. There doesn't. No. Amazing balance too.
And if you were, I drank the Kool-Aid like everybody did when they saw the first UFCs. There's a whole influx of traditional martial arts strikers like me that's just thought it was all shit as soon as we saw the Gracies and just didn't do it for years when karate's garbage. But I got to tell you, not just because of these young guys coming through now from traditional martial arts backgrounds that are making a dent. It's not because of that. But I really see the value, and I see as much value in my traditional apprenticeship with Shotokan karate as I have in anything else that I've done.
Yeah, which is really good, right? Which just tells us, there's certain reasons that I love jiu-jitsu. One is the process of learning it, and the way you train it is actually the way I train a little bit more boxing and kickboxing now, because it taught me a process of learning and adapting skills and hold training. So, like situational sparring, all that kind of stuff that I learned from jiu-jitsu, and now it's how we train a lot of things. So jiu-jitsu has definitely had a huge influence on me, but I haven't been caught by the dogma. I still love Thai boxing. I love boxing. I do love takedowns, and I realize that just grappling is not going to solve all your self-defense
and
problems.
You're lucky. Sorry to interrupt. You're lucky that you've stayed the course, because like any other business or any other, you want to make it, and you're in a position now with a big gym where for you having a point of difference is important. What makes you, I'm not a business coach, but I know that you need a point of difference. what makes you stand out from the crowd. And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu now is so popular, and that's not to diminish. There's a lot of young kids coming through that are killers, but it's like a conveyor belt. They're all sort of coming off the conveyor belt, but the point of difference that you've got over those guys, they might be able to do a lot of cool stuff old blokes like you and me can't do, but there's just not, you can't play catch up with those formative years of MMA and striking, and I'm glad I'm glad it might mean I'm not quite as fancy on the ground, and there might be some guys out there. Well, not might. There's definitely guys out there much better than me at jiu-jitsu, but I'm glad I can. I've still got that point of difference as a martial artist. Not that I need it anymore. I'm not doing it as a business, but within myself and my own sense of who I am as a martial artist, that I can do. When I say I mean blokes like you. You're in the same boat. Do have that holistic approach and can kick and punch and do continue to do so too. By the way, we're not resting on something that we did 10 years ago.
I try. To be honest, I don't spar with the guys as much anymore, because of my 5 knee operations. In saying that, Joey had to do some catch-up sparring today, so thanks for the rounds, Joey. And I tried to play southpaw for him, so I still do like to get in there every now and then. But I'm also real big on making sure that when people come to the center, I watch sparring and control the room to make sure that people are trying to add skills and also so they're used to listening. Hands up, chin down. Like if you're saying that to them during training, why are they going to listen to you in the fight when you tell them hands up, chin down? Someone's got to run that. Someone's got to run that room and play coach. So that's definitely been something that I ask myself all the time. Who am I? What's my purpose?
Let me rephrase it then. It doesn't even necessarily mean that you actually have to be doing 10 rounds on the pads or sparring the young fellas, but you've put yourself in a position where you've still got to develop your coaching skills in the striking realm, and so you're constantly having to revisit those things.
I'm trying to, and it's always fun going to the garage when I rock up and I think I'm going to grapple, and then we pull out the gloves and shin guards, and I get amongst it because I never not enjoy it too. Like once I get out there and get out, because that's what people forget too. Is like I love to train, you love to train, and sometimes you become this coaching figure, so you're so busy coaching, and you're still training with guys. But man, geez, it feels good to travel and not coach for a week. Man, spending time in Brisbane or whenever I've traveled overseas, and that's something that I miss with this whole Corona business going on now. Is like I used to do that every 6 to 8 weeks, go away for a long weekend, and I haven't done it for a bit. So I'm keen for things to open up again.
Oh yeah, so am I, mate. I'm not in a position where, and I've always admired that a lot about you. That you're just the quintessential seeker of knowledge, and that's why you're very good, and you continue to get better. I'd hazard a guess Ian Bone now technically is better than he was when he was a professional fighter. Matter of fact, I can get it.
Technically, especially as a coach.
Yeah, of course. There's a trade-off. But remember, but yeah, I feel for you, mate. Like I don't travel as much as you do, and haven't put myself in that position. But yeah, this whole thing sucks, man. It really does.
Yep. Now, we covered so much good ground today. I really appreciate you coming on, and again, you answered some tough questions for me today. I think what people need to remember is jiu-jitsu isn't fighting. Okay, sorry, it's not. Okay. Yeah. B, you guys, everybody is allowed to do martial arts for whatever bloody reasons you want. It's got to be fun. And just be honest with yourself. Like if you do it recreationally, fine. Then don't teach people self-defense if you can't slip a punch. We need more honest talks like this, and we need more old guys in gyms that are still punching and kicking and grappling with people as well. like yourself, Dan, please keep teaching people, because you do a bloody great job of it. And these conversations, while they might seem nothing to you, are super valuable, which is why I've tried to put them online. I really appreciate the time talking with you, and I know that my students are going to love it, and so a whole bunch of other people. So thanks again from the bottom of my heart for spending some time.
It's my honor, mate. I do enjoy the platform to have a chat, and it doesn't come naturally to me, but I do appreciate it, mate. Let me have a bit of a chat. And
I've just felt like I was sitting in the garage with a beer today. It's been good. It's probably a good break on isolation for you.
That's what's missing.
All right. Well, next time we can have a beer and do this again. So I really appreciate it, Dan. Thanks for that, mate.
All right, mate.